name is Beena Amanat and I lead Trustworthy and Ethical Tech at Deloitte. And today I have my co-leaders joining me on this podcast, Solving for Tech Ethics. Catherine Bannister co-leads Trustworthy and Ethical Technology along with me at Deloitte, and I am so happy to welcome her to the show. I know you very well. We are good friends, but can you provide our listeners with some background on how and why you started working on tech ethics at Deloitte?
I would be happy to, and it's good to talk to you too, Beena. In order to tell you that, I have to go a little bit back in time. So I have been with Deloitte I just celebrated 27 years about a week ago, and I have had a variety of roles, but always around technology. And for a while, I was the chief talent officer for our US and global consulting technology practices. And as part of that, I designed this concept called tech fluency, which was to try to make all of our technologists at Deloitte as fluent as possible, as capable as possible in technologies. And about 5 years ago, we started to spin that off to recognize the fact that, as we say, every company is now a tech company at its core, and Deloitte is no exception. So we needed to up our game collectively on our what we called tech savviness at Deloitte. And what that meant was we didn't expect all of our Deloitte practitioners, because as you know, Deloitte is a very large multidisciplinary organization. And not everybody is a technologist. But what we wanted everybody to do is we wanted everybody to be much more conversant, much more understanding about what are these technology disruptors that are impacting not only their clients, but themselves and their teams and their day-to-day work and their personal lives, quite honestly, as you know. And so we developed this concept of tech savviness, which was really curating content and setting expectations for everybody at Deloitte, no matter what their role is and no matter where they sat in the organization, to really lean in and understand, get a better understanding of what these technologies disruptors are. And we prioritized cloud, digital, analytics, because those were the things that were the most disruptive and the most prevalent in all of our people's lives, as well as in what the work that we were doing with our clients. Along the way, so we were well on this tech savvy journey for about 5 years now. And about 3 years ago, I started thinking, we're having all of our people think about what are the business impacts or the implications of these technologies. But we really need to be thinking about what are the ethical impacts, right? So we've been hearing about in the news, we hear, and as you know, because you do this for a living, a lot around AI. It was getting a lot of attention about what are the biases inherent in it, what are some of the decisions, what are some of the outcomes around AI in particular, and what are the ethical implications. And we started thinking about the fact that tech savvy was by definition tech agnostic, right? It was to really just get everybody much more familiar and comfortable in the realm of technology. And we wanted tech ethics to be similar, right? We knew that AI gets a lot of attention and it's got a lot of airtime on what are some of the ethical implications, but that's because it's really prevalent and it's really being disruptive in the organizational environment right now. But what we wanted to do was, much like tech savvy, we wanted to just lay the foundation so that all of our people at Deloitte, again, whether they consider themselves technologists or not, were thinking about fundamentally, what are the questions, what are the considerations that I need to do as a user of this technology, as a designer of this technology? How can I approach it? So thus was born ethical tech as an offshoot of tech savviness.
That's fascinating how you started, your journey to tech ethics, right? Everyone has a slightly different pathway there. So Catherine, you know this, I'm a technologist by training, and I've led all these building out AI products and solutions, and it was always focused on the ROI. What's the return on investment? What can we, what are the values we can get from AI, from the new technologies? As engineers, we tend to think about all the cool things that technology can do. And for me, it was that realization, wait a minute, there's a lot of cool things we can do, but there are negative things that could come up as offshoots as we start rolling out more and more of this technology. So, what are some of the common misconceptions of this topic that you have heard in the marketplace, or that you've heard, in the media, that are really just misconceptions around this topic?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, and I touched on it a second ago, is that it's only about AI, right? We really only need to pay attention to the ethical impacts or the implications of AI. Firstly, and I'm preaching to the choir because you know this already, but AI is a very broad term, right? AI has multi layers, and so there's all different aspects and considerations that you need to do just within AI. But as I alluded to before, there's other technology that is emerging, and that engineers and technologists and users and businesses are thinking about how best to lean into that space of those technologies. And what we want to do is to remind people that the sooner you can start thinking, to your point, about what are the negative outcomes, what are the unintended consequences of these technologies, regardless of what the technology is, that will enable better outcomes, better decision making. So that's the first one. I think there's two others. One is, and I alluded to this also a minute ago, is that there's this concept, I think, that if you aren't an engineer like you are, or a technologist by trade like I have been, that this doesn't pertain to you, right? Or that it only is a problem with big tech, the organizations that do technology or build technology or deploy technology, right? And I think that, one of the big things that we've been trying to drive home is that everybody has a role to play in this. We like to call it a team sport, that everybody needs to find themselves in their use of technology, their understanding of technology, and that it's not an over there problem. It's a in here problem, and we need to address it, and we need to educate ourselves and build the competency around it. And then I think the last misconception that it has kind of died down a little bit, but when we first started, there was some concern or confusion, I guess, around the word ethics, and you probably have experienced this as well, right? Like there's this idea that there's an idea that ethics is about coming up with the right answer, and that there's some magic playbook somewhere that says here's the right answer, and it's really not. It's about living in the gray. And similarly, there's this concept that ethics is resolved or taken care of through regulation or law or guidance, formal guidance like that. And the reality is also different, right? That where ethics comes in is where the law or regulation is as of yet silent, and may be silent forever because the topic or the capability of our lawmakers or our regulators hasn't evolved to that point. So clearing up kind of what we mean by making ethical decisions and widening the aperture to who's participating and whose stakeholding is being considered and whose harm is being considered, beyond kind of what the law says or what the regulation might say. So those are some of the big misconceptions that I've come across.
Catherine, thank you so much for sharing that. And those are all, misconceptions that I've encountered as well. And I know you recently published an article about ethics being a team sport. And I want to go a little bit onto, your misconception number 2, where you touched on it. Can you share with the audience why, ethics needs to be a team sport? Why does every employee need to know, and not just the engineers or the technologists? How does it matter if you are, say, an accountant in a finance team or a recruiter in an HR team? Why should they care about tech ethics?
Well, I think firstly, what we know is that you reach what we would call more ethical decisions when you have more diverse participation in the decision making. And part of part of when you tease back, or when you roll back the film, to say, we had ethical dilemma X with this product or this technology, and why, what were the decisions made, or how did we get to this result? If you look at it, many times it's because you had a homogenous group that were making those decisions, and homogenous in the sense of some of the obvious stuff like race and gender and ethnicity, but also homogenous in they were all technologists. To your point, they were all engineers. They were all of one ilk, right? And so one of the things that one key driver to making this a team sport and seeing how variety of participants in the decision making will help more ethical outcomes is by saying, how can we really interrogate who are the potential harmed individuals or groups by this technology. And the way to do that is to, think outside of your own experience. We only bring to the conversation and to the debate our own experience. And so the more that we can invite others with different experiences who may be able to shine a light on some of those outcomes, the better. So that's a big part of making it a team sport, is just widening the diversity of participation in the conversation. And then I think secondly is, I think that in organizations in particular, there's this risk of punting it to someone else's responsibility, right? That it's the CEO's or the C-suite's responsibility, or it's the IT department's responsibility, and the engineers and the technologists, or it's the board's responsibility. In reality, yes, they all have responsibility, but so do we. So do the average participants, because, and we touch on this in our piece as well, there's a direct relationship between the perceived ethical decision-making of an organization and the trust in that organization, both internally and externally. So the external is kind of obvious, right? That your stakeholders, your customers, your clients are going to look at you, and if they think that you aren't making ethical decisions about their data, about your product, then their trust is going to be eroded. But we're also seeing that internally. If your people don't think that the systems that they are using, or that are being used to recruit them or to hire them or to promote them, then trust is going to be eroded there as well. And so that's kind of at the crux of why we say organizationally, it really is a team sport, that everybody needs to find themselves in this conversation. And we need to create a culture of not only permission to participate, but an expectation to participate.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, like creating the culture, but then you also need to have the underlying processes that are aiding all employees to be part of the conversation, be part of the discussion. What are some of the changes that need to happen organizationally within the processes, the internal processes that's used, whether it's for technology procurement or technology use? What are your recommendations?
Yeah, so let me be clear, and you know this well, Bina, but I don't know that we've completely solved for this. We are on the journey ourselves, but we have made some decisions and have learned a lot of lessons along the way, starting back with the tech savvy experience, which was, first and foremost, you have to get buy-in of everybody. You have to make them aware, and you have to understand, to our earlier conversation, you have to have them be able to find themselves in that narrative, right? But then the obligation that we as leaders and as process owners in the organization have to the people once they're bought in is that we have to have resources, we have to have tools for them to use, and we have to have processes, to your point. And so one of the things that we're doing is that we have undertaken a prioritization process, for lack of a better term, to say, okay, so we know for sure that we want teams, for example, that are working on technology, actively working on technology that we are going to either produce or develop and deliver for a client, we for sure, especially in what we would call high threshold technologies like AI, like some of our cloud practices, some of those more disruptive technologies that we know we have examples of ethical dilemmas that are presented by them. We want for sure those teams to go through our training, go through our learning, put processes in and checkpoints to say, before we design something, have we actually gone through who are all the stakeholders, and how are we diversifying the participation in the conversation, and how are we making decisions, and how are we mitigating against some of these risks. So we know for sure those. And then within the rest of the business, we need to go through a similar exercise to say, like in HR, for example, you mentioned, in talent related organizations that are internal facing, what are the thresholds, or what are the considerations that we want, and what are the teams that we want to put processes around to say, if you are utilizing or procuring software that is going to use analytics of some sort that might have a detrimental outcome on some portion of our workforce, then we want to do a little bit more rigor around the interrogation of what are the potential outcomes and how do we mitigate against them. So one size does not fit all is what we're finding we already talked about one size does not fit all in technology, one size does not fit all in the people, but one size does not fit all in process as well, right? So not every single individual or team within your organization is going to have the same level of rigor and the same level of review that others are, but you need to kind of overlay your organizational core values with the risk threshold of the technology and what the technology's intended usage and audience is going to be.
Catherine, I know you touched on this very briefly, but you've done it very successfully at a large organization like Deloitte. For organizations that are just getting started, or for somebody coming new into a role like yours, one of the biggest challenges is to get the company to get focus around tech ethics, right? Which you've done quite remarkably well. So what is your advice for companies or for leaders like you who are taking on a new role and want to get the organization focused around tech ethics? What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen or you've experienced or you've heard about that you would like everybody to be aware of?
Yeah, so I think that in an organization like Deloitte, which is like I said, it's a large multidiscipline. We have people that are working in every industry, in every type of service, and so knowing where to start and knowing how to build that relevance is going to be important. So I think what we have found is that you need to have leadership support, for one, right? You need to tie this to the organizational, like I mentioned before, the organization's core values. You need to say that, you need to have your leaders, and leaders, not just C-suite and, business leaders, but team leaders. You need to have people say, this is important. We are making a commitment to it, and we are going to, move the needle internally on the way that we want to do it. One of the ways that we have done that at Deloitte, as you know, Bina, is that we Trustworthy and Ethical Tech, which you and I co-lead here, is now it's one of the commitments within our purpose office. So organizationally, we have stated that, as part of our commitment to being a purpose-driven organization, we are going to commit to trustworthy and ethical technology. It's huge it's huge in the sense of giving visibility to every member of our organization that this is important. And going back to my earlier comment, once we get people recognizing that this is important and what it is and how it's defined, then we have to deliver content and frameworks and resources, and we have to give something to our people to use, to be able to enable and empower them to fulfill this commitment, right? And anymore, this is not that is not a hard activity to get people interested and engaged. I have yet to have a conversation with anybody, internally or externally to Deloitte, about this topic that they aren't really intrigued, really encouraged by, leaning in and getting involved and finding out how they can. And this is not just technologists again. So I think that for people who are just trying to, start out, I would say figure out where you can get both leadership buy-in and scope it in a manageable way. Because like I said before, there's no one size fits all, and every organization is going to be different in terms of where and how they use technology and who needs to participate or be held accountable in these different arenas. So yeah. That's a big takeaway.
Yeah, and a big factor is also there's a lot of noise around this, right? We see headlines, it is about AI mostly, but more and more you hear about ethical tech and the issues emerging around ethics in emerging technologies. So, and you, Catherine, you've been one of the pioneers in the space, really taking on a large organization and trying to solve for it at scale. Roles like yours are now just being created in most organizations, and there is no fixed playbook for it, right? The challenge is we do get drowned out a lot with the noise, and which I think is important to raise awareness, but there's not as many leaders focused on solving for it, which is the reason why we have this podcast, which is really highlighting leaders like yourself who are focused on solving for tech ethics within their organizations, which is extremely complex, like you said, and there's no playbook and there is no definition of success. So
and we are just one example. Right? I mean, like there are many organizations that are, to your point, there's a lot of noise in the world about ethical technology writ large. And every organization is trying to figure out, where someone like me fits.
Yeah.
Our solution works, I think, for us, in that, we sit in technology strategy, we sit in the purpose office, we both come from a technology background, but, me from a tech savvy, tech fluency education, you from an ethics and that works for us. But I've seen organizations, add this responsibility into their ethics office, their existing ethics office. We've seen it in their legal counsel. We've seen it in their risk. We've seen it in, as a standalone, especially in organizations that have a significant investment in specific technologies. There could be a standalone chief, tech ethics officer, or, so I think that, again, this is an evolving discipline. This is an evolving field, and I don't know that there is a right or wrong way to do it. I think that organizations are really just trying to do it so that we can say, we recognize it's important. We recognize that there's this intersection between trust internally and externally, and we need to have a solution. And guess what? You may try something and it may not have the result that you want, so you have to tweak it, and you tweak along the way.
Yeah, so true. And that's our intent, to share those best practices, the lessons we are learning as we are all on this journey. But for Deloitte specifically, what will successfully solving for tech ethics look like in your mind?
That's a really good question. And we have been trying to articulate what is an aspiration, what is a goal. We need to have something that we're marching towards. And it's probably not enough to just say, every member of Deloitte is aware that trustworthy and ethical tech is important and knows how to find the resource. Those are aspirations. We would like to, make sure that, again, for our priority technologies, for our priority teams, for the work that we do for our clients, that our people are bringing a consistent, knowledgeable, considered, mindset to solving for technology solutions, right? And it goes back, Bina, to the conversation that we've had today, and that you and I have all the time, which is that is why it needs to be tech agnostic, right? That there will always be space for trustworthy AI, which I know is near and dear to your heart, and for some technologies like AI, there will be specific guidance on if you're doing this type of technology. Here are some specific considerations and some specific things. But what does success to me look like at Deloitte is if all of our people fundamentally understand that they need to be thinking broader about the impacts of technology where they sit, the technology of their business, the technology of their industry, the technology of their clients, and that they have the capability and the competency to think about those impacts and make those decisions regardless of what the technology is, because there are technologies coming that are going to be equally disruptive as AI has been, and we want our people who serve some of the biggest clients in the world, we want them to be thinking longer term and broader about what are these emerging technologies, how can I apply this decision making and this thought process to any type of technology, so that I'm making sure that I'm considering who's impacted and how to mitigate against the harms, so that we can all go back to being the technologists that want to utilize technology for the biggest benefit that we possibly can.
Yeah, so true. It's not fully figured out, and it could be a evolving goalpost, right? As new technologies come at us, maybe there are newer ethical related concerns that we need to be addressing. So,
but if we can just get our people knowing just that, right? That hey, this is a new technology. What should I be thinking about, right? How can I make sure that I've got, enough people, enough perspectives considered? How can I flex that muscle that we're trying to build in our practitioners to be thinking about that, so that when the next technology comes, they're already formulating what are the right strategies for mitigating against some of those ethical risks.
Thinking about tech ethics should be embedded in everybody's DNA, so that it's natural to think about the value, but also the negative impacts and how to mitigate those. I love it. And I know, Catherine, I've said this before, but you are a pioneer in this space. You started this journey much earlier than most others. What are you most proud of in the work that you and your team have accomplished till date around this topic?
Well, I'm very proud of my team. I have a small but mighty team that is as passionate, if not more, about this topic than I am. We have moved the needle, I think, rather significantly with both our leaders and our practitioners in terms of raising their awareness and making this top of mind. It may not be, to your point, it may not yet be embedded in the DNA of every single Deloitte person, but it is now one of our, as I said, one of our formal commitments at the U.S. firm it is a topic that is, as you well know, top of mind for most, if not all, of our leaders, and our people are engaged and are wanting to learn more and wanting to participate more in the process. So I'm very proud that we said that step one was building awareness and embedding this into our culture, and I think that we have succeeded. So,
and I've experienced it. So, Catherine, that's awesome. But changing gears a little bit, given what you know about the space and how rapidly it's evolving, what is it about tech ethics that keeps you up at night?
A lot of what we've talked about already. I mean, I wouldn't. I think that when you when you start thinking about the ethical implications of technology, and you are a technologist, and this is kind of what you live and breathe, that you can't help but stay up at night, because that's kind of the nature of what we do. Yeah. But I think that what concerns me, what I'm still worried about, is that there is still this potential for people to distance themselves from the problem, for people to say, again, I don't do AI, I don't do robotics, I don't do quantum, I don't do I don't do technology, right? I have so many people that say to me, well, that's very interesting and it's great and it makes for really good, sci-fi TV and all of that, but I don't personally do that. And, my question to them is, do you have a smartphone? 99.9% of them do. Do you do Yelp reviews? Do you make dinner reservations online? Do you do searches online? So you participate in the technology and you are impacted. And so I think what's still the big hurdle, it doesn't keep me up at night that I'm worried so much about it, but the next big hurdle is really cracking that nut of, how do we not only have people see that they really do need to participate, and they really need to they need to be engaged, but how do we enable that, right? How do we make sure that their voices have a seat at the table and are able to weigh in on some of these big, hairy decisions that are facing us?
Yeah, so true. And I love the example of the smartphone, because everybody is using technology even if they may not be building it, right? The
Exactly.
consumer,
And is
yeah.
impact, and they're impacted by it.
Now switching to the positive side, what gives you hope in the future of tech ethics?
Podcasts like this. I'm not just praising you, but the fact that I mean, in just 2.5 years or so 2.5 years ago, like, this was a very, very niche conversation, right? And I don't know about you, but I feel like the world has woken up, and that that there's a plethora of resources. There are a variety of ways for people outside of their work organizations to get involved, to learn more, to be engaged. I think that just the level of awareness and the interest gives me hope on that challenge that I just said, which is, how do we have people find themselves in it? There are so many examples of new technologies and new organizations and groups that people can engage with to feel like they are participating in the conversation. And I think that's great.
Yeah, and realistically, for technology to reach its full potential, we need to figure this out, right? We need to solve for ethics. Otherwise, there's always going to be negative impacts that's going to slow down for the technology from reaching its true potential and real driving change at the speed and scale at which we want.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that has struck me on this journey over the last couple of years is that, you mentioned about how, we're always, the engineers and the technologists are always, they're looking for the ROI. They're looking for that moonshot, right? Of course, right? Like we wouldn't have gotten into technology if we weren't excited by technology. But the thing that I've been kind of grappling with is that if you widen the participation, you actually are expanding the potential ROI, because you're not excluding or harming some stakeholder you're designing for. You're considering them in the solution. And so to your point of, maybe I'm changing my answer to the last question about what gives me hope, but I think that, to the point that, we do technology because we see the benefit, because we know that with technology we can change the world, literally. That the more of the world that gets considered and participates in the solutioning, then the more more of the world is bettered by said technology, right? And so that gives me great energy, obviously, and great hope that if we can overlay this diverse participation in the conversation, that the ROI and the benefit will have that even greater reach than the original design team or that homogenous group could have ever hoped for. So that's maybe that's too rose-colored glasses for you, but
no, I love the optimism. I'm a technology optimist as well. Catherine, this was such a great conversation, and our audience is usually people who are interested in tech ethics, leaders who are beginning to get more engaged in this space for their organizations. What would be your one piece of advice to this audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think my one piece of advice is that if you are listening to this podcast and if you are asking the question, how do I get started? That's more than half the battle. I think it goes back to, you have to have energy behind it. Clearly, I think you can tell that I've got a lot of energy around this topic. I have a lot of passion. You have to, in order to affect change. And so I think by showing curiosity, by listening to this podcast, by leaning in and engaging on a variety of resources, that is step one. And it's a really big step towards trying to figure out, okay, how do I take that, find my place in the narrative and take it to my organization and overlay it that way.
Love it. Catherine, how can the audience stay connected with you after listening to this episode?
Well, they can go to our Deloitte.com site and look at Trustworthy and Ethical Tech, which is where our points of view, that one of which you mentioned earlier, is posted on Trustworthy and Ethical Tech being a team sport. And they can also find me at cbannister@Deloitte.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation, Catherine. I feel like we've worked together so well and I know you so well, but every time I learn so much by just hearing you speak. So thank you for this conversation and really appreciate your time and all the work that you've done so far.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Catherine, thanks again for being with us on the show today. And I want to thank our audience for tuning into Solving for Tech Ethics. Be sure to stay tuned into Trustworthy and Ethical Technology at Deloitte for more of our latest thinking and market insights. Thank you and take care.
This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, go to deloitte.com/about.